Welcome to 30-Minute Reviews. I am Adam. It is not a day to talk about, what's what I'm looking for here? We're not going to talk about news items. I don't think there's really anything in the news that I can weigh in efficiently on, which is ultimately the biggest deciding factor if I cover a news story. If it's something I can discuss and I can speak eloquently on it, then, as eloquently as this podcast is, then I will weigh in. If it's not something like that, then I won't. Simple as that. Because I don't think that it's worth just throwing your hat into the ring if you have nothing intelligent to say on the topic anyway. So, here we are, and we are going to talk about, this is less about a news story and more about something that I've noticed is a trend lately in entertainment journalism. And because the show that we're going to be using as the key example today did just come out last week, we're going to put the spoiler noise in. And the reason for that is Book of Boba Fett is what weighs heavily on this, what's it called? On this episode. So, what we're going to start with is an article came out, and it was, these things, I think it's Valnet owns them, but it's Screen Rant, Game Rant, all these things, where it's their entire thing is to get a bunch of writers, pay them dog shit, and have them write a bunch of articles about, nonsense. And ultimately what this does is it lowers the level of discourse that we're getting out of these things. What ends up happening is we get articles that are designed to get you to click on them, even if what's going on in the article and what it's talking about is not exactly the most astute observation, or it's the most cursory of cursory comparisons, where it's this has something and this has something, so let's do 500 words about how these are the same thing, and it's not necessary. So one of the articles they did was about how people are pointing out a plot hole in the Book of Boba Fett, and I pointed this out when I did my review on Beware of Spoilers, where there is a logical inconsistency. I wouldn't call it a plot hole, because I don't think it is a plot hole, because what a plot hole is not this. So in episode 1 of the Book of Boba Fett, we see him emerge from the Sarlacc pit. He escapes the Sarlacc pit. Then episode 4 of the Book of Boba Fett, he goes back to the Sarlacc pit to reclaim his armor. Now, we had seen him step out of the, get out of the Sarlacc pit with his armor intact, and then we see what happens to his armor, which is where he gets, he gets, they get stolen from him by Jawas, and then we know that Cobb Vanth is going to end up with the Sarlacc, with the armor, but the problem is, it's not that, we didn't need to see that, because I don't think anyone was now let's see him kill the Sarlacc pit. Fuck the Sarlacc pit. I don't think we necessarily needed that. But that's ultimately what the scene is. It's he kills the Sarlacc pit, or he kills the Sarlacc, and then he, he's oh, my armor's not in there. And we knew that. Now, I think that the issue is people are calling this a plot hole, and we get a lot of things being called plot holes that really aren't plot holes. Because maybe it's just to me, my understanding of how I would define a plot hole is if something happens on the show, and that something is directly contradicted by something else that leads to a conclusion that is different. Now, say for example this, think of a plot hole like a plot black hole, where there is no plot there, but it doesn't explain how something happened. It's something is missing from the story that is instrumental to the story making sense fundamentally on the narrative level. So, for example, a plot hole for this scenario would not be Boba Fett goes back because he thinks his armor is in the Sarlacc pit. It would be Boba Fett goes back because he thinks his armor is in the Sarlacc pit, and his armor is in the Sarlacc pit, and he recovers it. That would be a plot hole, because what we know is that it was taken from him by the Jawas, and then we know that Timothy Oliphant ends up with it from the Jawas, and because of all of that, if it ended up back in the pit, then there, without explanation as to how it ended up back in the pit, it could be a plot hole, or at minimum plot convenience. That's like, oh, well, he needed his armor back and it's there, but we know where his armor was and how he gets it back. Because we've seen that on The Mandalorian. And I think that that's just, like, part of it, where it's like, we're living this thing where, like, the word, like, I keep seeing, like, plot hole for shows that are currently ongoing, and it'll be, like, episode 5, and it's out of 7, and it's like, there's a plot hole in this show, and it's like, well, no, it's not really a plot hole, because a plot hole would be like, because the thing is, the story is still ongoing. Jesus Christ, this motherfucker needs brakes. Like, a plot hole would be, like, if they never explained something. Like, if something happened and they never explained, how it happened, that would be a plot hole. But to say that, like, halfway through a show they haven't explained something yet on your timeline, like, oh, well, I want this explained now, well, that's not how it works. Like, their job is not to explain things to you on your timeline. It is to explain it over the course of the show. Like, that's the important thing here, is making sure that it is explained at some point between the beginning of the show and the end of the show. Where it gets explained doesn't matter. So, writing an article like, oh, there's a plot hole in this show because they haven't explained X, Y, and Z yet, it's like, take a deep breath. There's still X number of episodes left, and they can have plenty of time to explain this at that point. Then what else was there that I wanted to address with this? And it's like, the plot hole as a criticism tool is not done well. It's like, it's also like, I don't understand this, therefore it's a plot hole. It's like, well, no, you don't understand it. That's different. Or like a plot hole could be like a missing link in the story, or like, to me at least, something doesn't fall to the level of plot hole unless it is something instrumental to the story happening, to the narrative of the story, going from beginning to end. And it's not Deus Ex Machina, because a Deus Ex Machina is very specifically at the end of the story, and it's completely out of left field. A plot hole is something that had to have started in the show earlier, gone through the show, reached the end of the show, and then been explained there. And then the issue falls in there. Where there's no, like, they go out of their way to not explain something, or not make something make sense. Like, oh, how did this happen? Oh, who cares? I'm trying to think of what's a good example of something like that, where it's like, oh, there was a concrete plot hole because they didn't explain it at all between the show's beginning and the show's end, and it was kind of instrumental to understand. I can't think of that. Where it's like, characters acting out of character is not a plot hole. It's inconsistency. It's continuity inconsistency, to be sure. But it's not a plot hole. A plot hole is something where it's like, I think that, for the word whole to fit, something needs to be missing. Like, there needs to be a key part of the story missing for the word whole to work. Because at its core, that's what a whole is. A whole is a missing piece of anything. Like, it's a missing piece of the ground. It's a missing piece of space in the case of a black hole. It's it's all things like that, where it's like, you know, it needs to be something missing. And I think that's ultimately why I don't think the word, you know, plot hole works in a good amount of cases. Like, for this, it's more of an inconsistency than a plot hole, where it's like, and really it just feels like laziness, where it's like, alright, we gotta pad the runtime out, so what are we gonna do? And the thing is, too, it's like, I don't want to get too deep into a Book of Boba Fett diatribe, but I've done that already on Beware of Spoilers if you want to get my thoughts on it, but it feels to me like there's no reason why Book of Boba Fett needed to be a show. It could have been a movie, and a lot of what's going on is kind of just not interesting, and I think that, like, him going back to the Sarlacc pit with his ship to try and find his armor is just kind of silly, like, and time wasty. It's like, oh well, we need to pad the runtime somehow, so let's go out to the Sarlacc pit again and see if we can find his armor. It's probably there, maybe, who knows? But yeah, I feel like that's kind of the issue with the terminology comes in there. What else I want to address this? I think that's really it. It's like, it really is something that I saw, and it's been something that's been bothering me a lot, because like, at the end of the day, it's not a plot hole. Most of the times that these articles run a piece about how it's like, is this a plot hole? And the thing is, too, you'll notice that they get pointed out as plot holes because plot hole also means poorly written. Because that's the thing, is it's like, if there's some kind of, you know, major narrative, you know, issue that didn't get cemented over before the road opened, then, you know, it's systemic of poor writing, or, you know, symptomatic of poor writing, as some would say. So that's why that word gets used a lot, where it's like, oh, well, you know, it's all about, it's to prove the point that this is not good. We're not going to say what we mean. We're going to say it's poorly written, and because it's poorly written, you know, that's why we can hate it. And it's like, we're going to point out X, Y, and Z is why it's poorly written. Meanwhile, it's like, you know, there are things that don't get called out for being poorly written when it 100% is poorly written. Like Ghostbusters Afterlife. We're going to use this as an example. Like, and that's the thing, is it's like, let's take the show, flip it on its script, and be like, okay, well, what if we did X, Y, and Z instead? Would this still be well received? Like, in my discussion of the Book of Boba Fett, I keep saying, if we flip it, and it's a show about Fennec Shand, and Boba Fett's just along for the ride, and it's the Book of Fennec Shand, and everything's the same, except that Fennec Shand is the lead. Everything's the same, except Fennec Shand is the lead. Sorry, I'm so congested, and I keep feeling like something keeps getting in the way of me talking. And Fennec Shand is the lead, and she's doing everything Boba Fett's doing over the course of the flashbacks and all of that. Is this show well received? Do people love this show and glom onto it and accept it? I mean, it's mixed right now, and there are people who are turning on it, but would they have given it this long before doing that if it was the Book of Fennec Shand? And I don't think it would have been. And it's like, you know, I feel like it's a weird kind of, it's a weird kind of thing where it's like, if we watch this and that question gets asked, it's like, well, no, it would not have been tolerated this long. Like, if we watch, like Ghostbusters Afterlife did not get called out enough, I don't think, for what happened in the, you know, for what happened over the course of that show, that movie. Because if you look at what happens in Ghostbusters Afterlife, like, you know, if we if we swapped it, and we did, instead of it being the original Ghostbusters minus Harold Ramis, and it was the all-female Ghostbuster team, who did the same role, the same situation, the same, ending. Like, the ending's identical, where it's like, they call in, and it's like, and then Melissa McCarthy, Kristen Wiig, and Kate McKinnon, and Leslie Jones show up, instead of, instead of the original Ghostbusters who do show up. Like, at that point, is the movie still hailed as great? And I don't think it would have been. Because that ending is shit. Because on what planet is it okay to have an entire movie about these people, and about them coming into their own, and doing their own thing, and developing into their own people? And then, all of a sudden, in the third act, it's like, well, good job doing all of this, and, like, fixing up the Ecto-1, and doing all of that cool stuff, and like, all of that. Like, good on ya. But we're just gonna take it from here and do our own thing. Like, on what planet is that okay? I don't think it is. And I don't think it makes the show any particularly interesting. And I don't think it makes for good, for good, interesting storytelling, which is a kind of a big deal. Which is, and that's the thing. It's like the fact that we have to put things through the prism of, would we like this if a woman did it? And if the answer is no, then it's not good. It's problematic, to say the least. But I think that's, the kind of thing where it's like, look, if we are going to be treating these things on two different levels, where it's like, we are going to be treating stuff made by men at, like, really what it is we're treating stuff made by men as a lesser, like, method of storytelling, because we're kind of, for stuff made by women, we're holding it to a higher standard than stuff made by men. Because we're calling out stuff that happens in stuff made by men, stuff made by women, that we're not calling out stuff made by men. And I think that that's ultimately what this is coming down to. I'm not saying that everything that's, like, this is a plot hole, this is a plot hole, this is a plot hole. I'm not saying all of that is gender or race or anything based. I'm saying there's a good amount of it that gets done in an effort to legitimize criticism of things that are there. And it's like, well, if we look at the other stuff too, then it doesn't make sense that it does a, it does that. It's like when we look at, like, the Eternals, which got panned for being too long. It's like, well, why didn't we get, like, this year we got a 4-hour cut of Justice League, because that's what the director wanted. Like, why is that okay, but not Eternals to be 2.5? Like, it's stupid. So we'll wrap up there for today. We'll be back with more stuff if it happens, and until then, have a great rest of your week.